First of all, thank you everybody for coming. I'm Dicky. I've been around here for a long time. I've been a member of the Ohev Synagogue.
Hold the mic.
You're not speaking into the mic.
How's that? I've been a member of the Ohev Synagogue. I was born here for thousands of years. Before I get started, I am not going to go into biographical detail about all of the members, past and present members of the synagogue, although I will mention a few from time to time. This presentation is about the synagogue, not necessarily about the members of the synagogue. And by the same token, I am not really going to go into much, hardly at all, about Jewish theology, customs, or holidays, because when I look last, I am not a rabbi. And so that's, once again, that's not what the purpose of this is. Before I start, I want to give some credit. A lot of the material that is in my talk up until about from the inception of the synagogue till about the middle 80s is courtesy of my nephew, Kerry Green, who's the oldest son of Barry and Edie. Kerry wrote a paper when he was in high school on this very subject, and I found the paper, and a lot of this material up until about 1985 I got from the information that Kerry had in his paper. A lot of the information came from old minutes from the synagogue. For whatever reason, we were pack rats. There were minutes from the very beginning, and I've been the secretary for quite a long time, and I've got minutes, so I've just spent a lot of time poring over old minutes. Also, my recollection, although I'm getting older and I'm getting feeble, but whatever my recollections were, and then plus in 2002, the synagogue had a celebration celebrating our 75th anniversary. We had a big dinner and celebration at Chatmoss, and a few months prior to the celebration, I asked everybody to go through and dig up anything they could find, old photos, old documents, pictures, and people were flooding me with all of this stuff, and I put together a PowerPoint presentation for our 75th anniversary, and I was able to, fortunately I kept the disc, and I have been going over the disc, and although it didn't give me a lot of concrete information, it brought back a lot of memories that I was able to jot down. So with that in mind, we're going to start. We think that the first Jewish person that came to Martinsville was named Sam Heiner, H-E-I-N-E-R. And he settled here in about 1900. By 1915, we'd grown to 5 Jewish families. There was the Sam Heiners, there was Sam Kolodny's, and many of you will remember Kolodny's, a lady shop in the downtown area. There was Max Berlin, and he was the father of Ted Berlin, who had Ted's Men's Shop downtown, which I'm sure you all remember. Abe Fussfeld and Abe Globman, who of course is Barry and I's grandfather. By 1927, the Jewish population in our area had grown to 25 people. And it was these 25 who formed the core group that built the Ohev Zion Synagogue. Ohev Zion means love of Zion. The original synagogue was on Moss Street, and the building still stands today. It is a senior center. And if you ever go by and take a look at the senior center, which is our original synagogue, the Star of David is still on the outside, and it's still being used. According to some of the old congregational minutes, the original members wanted to bring the Jewish people in the area closer together and to provide a means of providing Jewish education for the children. Sam Kolodny and our grandfather, Abe Globman, were the original members of the building committee, and it was their duty to try and raise the funds in order to erect the building. The Moss Street location was chosen because an awful lot of the Jewish families lived on Moss Street or in the area. And a lot of the Jewish families at that time, which was in the mid-1920s, were first-generation citizens. They had come over from Eastern Europe. A lot of them had come over from Russia and Poland. Many of them were Orthodox, and they observed all of the Jewish traditions, which included on the Sabbath not doing any manual labor. You don't cook, you don't clean, you don't wash, you don't drive. So having the synagogue located on Moss Street within a very short distance of where most of the Jewish families lived was perfect because they could walk to the synagogue. Naturally, with such a small congregation, financing the synagogue was going to be a big problem. Donations from the congregational members were solicited, and by early 1927, we had raised about $5,000. Since the low bid to build the synagogue was $11,000, the Board of Trustees decided that having almost half the money raised was enough to go ahead and start construction. The cornerstone was laid and dedicated on May 17, 1927. Donations continued to come in, and supplemented by a $3,000 loan from the People's National Bank, the building was completed in late October, and on December 4th, 1927, before a crowd of several hundred people, the cornerstone was laid. And I didn't bring the PowerPoint with me because I didn't know if we would have the material, but we have pictures of the dedication of the cornerstone on December 4th, 1927, and just judging from the picture, there must have been 200 to 300 people in attendance, which means that with 45 Jewish members, a huge crowd from outside the Jewish community attended the laying of the cornerstone. During the 30s and 40s, membership continued to grow as Martinsville and the surrounding areas were prospering with new business and industries. We were a hub of, as you all know, we were a hub of tobacco, textiles, furniture. I'm not sure what year the DuPont plant opened, but in a short time we had the DuPont plant. In 1943, the first recorded confirmation from our Sunday school was held when 4 students graduated. In 1945, the ladies of the Ohev Synagogue formed the Hadassah chapter. Hadassah is a national association of ladies, and is their mission to raise funds and to do worthy causes for the Jewish communities and Israel. The women also generated a weekly bulletin which they mailed out to all of the Jewish members of the congregation who were serving in the armed forces during the Second World War. As an additional fundraiser, the first plans for a rummage sale were discussed by the sisterhood. Since several of the congregational members were clothing retailers in the downtown areas, the members of our sisterhood contacted many of their vendors asking for donations of free merchandise. And I'm sure if you've been around for quite a while, you remember the Ohev Sisterhood store. We would have it in the social hall in the synagogue, and over the years, the Sisterhood store raised over $200,000 to help funding different projects in the synagogue, to help with the rabbi's salary and costs, and just any costs relating to the running of the synagogue. As I mentioned earlier, for our 75th anniversary in 2002, I asked the members to dig up any photos or memorabilia that they could find, and I put together a PowerPoint. Some of the photos from the 1940s and 1950s were just remarkable, and they showed that the congregation, the Ohev congregation members, they did everything together. There were pictures of testimonial dinners in the social hall. They put on these plays, which, from the pictures I saw, did not look very professional, but they had fun. There were pictures of a Halloween party and all kinds of parties during the different Jewish holidays, and who knows what else. They stuck together. In 1948, the members decided they wanted to have their own cemetery. And this was proposed, and a piece of land was purchased in the Ridgeway area, which is still our cemetery. Unfortunately, we had a funeral there this morning. The cemetery was dedicated on October 2nd, 1949. It's still in use today. And if you go down 220 on the way to Greensboro, a key landmark is stoplight, and if you take a left on the stoplight, you turn like you're going to Eden. You pass the Ridgeway Drive-In and then go on into Route 14 or whatever it is, takes you to Eden. If you go past the stoplight, continue on 220, within a mile, you will see it off to the left. There's a cemetery beside our cemetery, but there is a large sign, a semicircular sign that says Ohev Cemetery. And it's been our cemetery, and unfortunately, like in all the rest of the cemeteries, it's filling up a little too fast. A significant milestone was achieved in 1949 when the congregation had enough members and enough funds to hire our first full-time rabbi. His name was Rabbi Sussman, Fred Sussman. Hiring a full-time rabbi for such a small congregation was almost unheard of in those days. As it turned out, Rabbi Sussman only stayed a few months due to his personal financial problems. According to some of the old minutes, he was having some financial problems. He ended up borrowing $500 from the synagogue treasury, decided that he couldn't pay it back, and left. In May of 1950, Ohev hired Rabbi Hyman Gudkowitz. Unfortunately, Rabbi Gudkowitz died from a heart attack in 1953. The interesting thing about Rabbi Gudkowitz, and you really have to go back to your history books during the Second World War, he was the father of Rabbi Good, G-W-O-D-E, who gained fame in World War II as one of the 4 chaplains. When the 4 chaplains, and I can't remember the name of the ship, there was a Navy ship that was sinking and was going down, and the 4 chaplains, of which Rabbi Good was one of them, stayed on board. This is almost like a scene out of the Titanic. They stayed on board, they got the men together, they led everybody in prayer, and they went down with the ship. Our next rabbi was Rabbi Shapiro. Rabbi Shapiro stayed with us for 20 days. And I don't remember anything about it. In order to become more attractive to potential rabbis, the congregation decided that they would like to purchase the home next door to the synagogue to be used as a home for the rabbi, where the rabbi could live rent-free, which they did. That original house on Moss Street is no longer standing, but it was in use for a long time. In 1954, Rabbi Mordecai Thurman was hired. And Rabbi Thurman was my rabbi during my childhood and teen years, and when I became bar mitzvahed in 1955, he bar mitzvahed me. He also bar mitzvahed Barry. He was a dynamic speaker, a scholar. He was well respected in the non-Jewish community, and he was extremely popular with the Jewish youth. It was sort of a custom, it's really a custom in just about every religion, that after you're confirmed in your Sunday school, that's the end of your association between you and your church or synagogue. They go their separate ways. But Rabbi Thurman was determined to keep us into the synagogue. So he formed a group of us teens called the Hillelites. And Barry was in, I was, Barry's younger brother Kenny, David Schreifetter, David Hollander, I think we're the original 5 of the Hillelites. And on Saturdays, we would go over Rabbi Thurman's house. We would discuss some Jewish topics, Jewish theology. We were learning. We continued our learning. And then after our session, we'd have lunch and go bowling. Now, I said I wasn't going to talk a lot about Jewish theology or terminology, but I'm going to mention one thing here that has to do with synagogue. As many of you know, Judaism is broken into 3 broad religious classifications of worship: Orthodox, Conservative, and Reform. And without going into a 12-year discourse about the differences, here's the difference in very, very broad strokes. The Orthodox, they keep kosher, they keep all the kosher laws, they obey all of the Jewish laws, the Jewish traditions. When they go to services, about 99% of their services are conducted in Hebrew. The conservative movement is right in the middle. Members usually observe some of the Jewish traditions. Their service is conducted, I'm going to take a guess here, 50 to 75% in Hebrew, and all the rest. The Reform movement is a lot more liberal in its interpretation of the religion. Very few keep kosher. A lot of the services are conducted in English. Now, I'm bringing this up because it relates back to our synagogue. Most of the original Jewish families, as I said before, most of them were first-generation Jews, first-generation American citizens. And they were born in Eastern Europe, and an awful lot of them were Orthodox when they came here, including our grandparents. But living in a small town, it was almost impossible to observe all the kosher dietary restrictions. My grandpa once told me that if he were to keep kosher, he would have had to order just about all of his food from Baltimore or Charlotte. Kosher, if you're keeping kosher, you have to keep 2 refrigerators. There's something in the Bible that says you cannot mix dairy and meat. So you got to have 1 refrigerator, 1 set of dishes, 1 set of silverware, where all of your dairy food products are kept, and another where all of your meat is kept. As a result, more and more of the congregation that even they were Orthodox to start with became conservative. And our synagogue settled into conservatism. We used the conservative prayer books on our regular Sabbath services. We used the conservative prayer books on our high holiday services. And our services, from what I remember, I would say were conservative. They almost bordered on Orthodox. They were fairly heavily conducted in Hebrew. And I remember that during the Jewish high holidays, for those of you who are unfamiliar with Jewish high holidays, and they just concluded a few weeks ago, there is Rosh Hashanah, which is the Jewish New Year. And then 10 days after that is Yom Kippur, which are the Days of Atonement. During Yom Kippur, you do not eat, you fast, and services. Our services don't go all days, but in Orthodox congregation, the services go all day, almost all of 2 days. And in the old days, we would start, during the high holidays, we would start services at 8 o'clock in the morning, and my great-uncle, Nathan Patowski from Galax, would come over here. Uncle Nathan always stayed in my bedroom. Uncle Nathan would do the first hour of the service all in Hebrew. And then it would start about 8. At about 9 o'clock, my grandfather would come up and do the second hour all in Hebrew. And then at about 10 o'clock, what we generally call the main part of the service would start, and an awful lot of the people that weren't all that religious, were not all that observant, would come at 10 o'clock and later. But I distinctly remember that our grandfather made me and Barry go to that get up and go to services at 8 o'clock. The first 2 hours were done in Hebrew. We didn't understand a word. And Barry and I would come into the services and try to smuggle in sports magazines and newspapers and get in the back and sit by the wall where the sun was in so we could read our newspapers in the sun. Okay. Later on, our synagogue youth formed a chapter of USY. USY is United Synagogue Youth. It is a youth organization that has their own project. It just teaches them to further their Judaism. And we had active USY. The USY, they would put on a Mother's Day dinner, and they would put on a play. They would go to USY conventions as far as way as Chicago, and our chapters were very, very active because we had a strong teen presence in those days. By 1961, members of the congregation wanted a more modern synagogue in a nicer neighborhood. So the congregation where we currently use on Parkview Avenue was constructed. So our synagogue right now is 62 years old. It is in wonderful condition, and it'll probably be our synagogue forever. The combined resources of the congregation and the sisterhood financed the construction, and the house next door to the synagogue was built in 1965 to be used as a rabbi's house. Rabbi Thurman stayed until 1963. He left because I think he married a non-Jewish girl, where in those days was a lot more taboo. That it was really taboo for a rabbi to marry outside the faith, and I think Rabbi Thurman was embarrassed, and I think probably that some of the members were not too thrilled with the fact that he married outside the faith, and he left. And I know I, for one, mourned his leaving because, as I mentioned before, he was my rabbi during my teen years. In those days, not only did we have an active Sunday school, minutes of our old minute shows that we had as many as 40 kids in our Sunday school in the 60s and 70s. As I mentioned, we had the USY chapter. We had a junior congregation, and we were very, very active. Now, when Rabbi Thurman left, during the next couple of years, we were unable to secure a full-time rabbi. And it was hard because we were a small congregation, Jewish congregation in the South. People looked and saw our small membership and assumed right away that we were not very well funded. And so for the next couple of years, we continued to have Friday evening services. And what we would do, some of our members would conduct the services. Sometimes we would hire student rabbis or retired rabbis. And during the high holidays, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we would get a rabbi, probably a retired rabbi or a student rabbi, to come and conduct the services for us. At that time, we were members of United Synagogue. United Synagogue is the national organization for conservative congregations. I mentioned that we were conservative. So after we had been without a rabbi for a couple of years, a delegation from the congregation marched up to New York, went into the offices of United Synagogue and said, "We need you. We're paying dues, and we're good members. We want you to help us find a rabbi." And they couldn't. They were no help at all in helping us secure a rabbi. So we marched right across the street to the Union of American Hebrew Congregations, which was the Reform group. And we said, "We need a rabbi." And they said, "But you guys are conservative and you're not a member of our organization." And we replied, "You help us find a rabbi and we'll switch teams." And they did. And we did. We became members of the Reform movement. Although on our services we still used the conservative prayer book and we held services just like we had in the past, but nobody knew. In 1970, we received a letter from Rabbi Milton Schlager, who was a rabbi in Meridian, Mississippi. He wanted to leave Mississippi because his temple had been bombed, and he feared for his family. And he applied for the position. He was hired, so he became our rabbi, lived next door, rent-free. And in 1978, he left, and I can't remember why he left. He left. And Rabbi Harold A. Friedman from Galveston, Texas was hired. And Rabbi Friedman remained our rabbi until his retirement in the late 1980s, or it might have been 1990. Rabbi Friedman was a very educated man. He was a scholar. He loved to talk. He could turn a 5-minute talk into a 3-hour soliloquy. But he loved the congregation. His wife, named Miriam, was very sophisticated, got along fairly well with the ladies of the synagogue. And like I said, he stayed until his retirement. During those days, our synagogue continued to thrive. The men had a B'nai B'rith chapter. The B'nai B'rith men's is sort of similar to the ladies' Hadassah chapter. It is a men's organization, and their purpose is to spread the word of Judaism, not to prophesize, but to just help out wherever they can. The main branch, the national branch of B'nai B'rith is the Anti-Defamation League, and the Anti-Defamation League is vigilant in trying to prevent anti-Semitism in our country. The men of B'nai B'rith, they would meet, they would tend to business, and the meeting was always topped off with a steak dinner. The sisterhood, in addition to raising funds through their store, they had a book club called the A to Z Book Club. As I previously mentioned, they had a Hadassah chapter, they had the sisterhood store. Starting in the late 70s, the congregation held an art auction to raise funds. And all of those funds and other funds were put to good use as the congregation continued to remodel and upgrade our building. In 1981, we did extensive remodeling, including all the ceilings and whatnot. We got stained glass windows, and we have continued to keep the building in excellent shape ever since. By 1985, OSI membership consisted of approximately 45 Jewish families. And then the fortunes of our congregation, along with the fortunes of Martinsville and Henry County, started to deteriorate. The furniture and tech, and I'm not telling you anything you don't know, the furniture and textile business began to go overseas. DuPont, I think it was 1998, closed their nylon plant, which at one time employed close to or maybe more than 4,000 people. Martinsville's unemployment rate, I think, was the highest in the state. And as the population dwindled, so did our congregation numbers and the numbers of just about all of the other churches in the area. The board members got together and decided that although the synagogue must continue as a religious entity, we could no longer afford a full-time rabbi. Fortunately, we had established an excellent relationship with Beth David Synagogue in Greensboro. Irv Corman, who was a CPA, and I think was Marty Kravitz's CPA, had been serving as our cantor. A cantor is the officer, the person in the synagogue generally who was responsible for the musical part of the services. Large congregations have a full-time cantor, sometimes they have a full-time and assistant cantor. Small congregations don't, but when we had our high holiday services, we would try to get a cantor to lead us in the musical passages of the services. And we were able to secure the services of Irv Corman. We made, as I said, we made every effort to have a cantor during the high holidays. And of course, during the high holidays, attendance is much higher. It's sort of like in your churches, you have people that you see twice a year. You see them Christmas and Easter. You never see them again. Well, we have members that we see for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and we don't see them again. So, Irv Corman became our cantor during the high holiday services. Irv passed away. In the late 90s. I'm not exactly sure what year it was. But after his passing, we were able to obtain the services of a remarkable guy from Greensboro named Paul Gould, G-O-U-L-D. Paul, it was a remarkable story. Paul was a Holocaust. Paul escaped from a Nazi concentration camp. I can't remember what camp it was, but Paul was able to stow away on at the bottom of a vegetable wagon and get out of the camp. And when the farmer who was transporting the cart got to his home and saw Irv, he threatened to turn Paul in. And Paul said, if you turn me in, I'm going to turn you in as a homosexual. And the guy said, well, I'm not a homosexual. And Paul says, you are, and I'm going to tell him you are. And they let Paul go. Paul was so loved by our members that we persuaded him to be our cantor, not only during the high holiday service, but during our Friday night Sabbath service. And he he was a gem. He was an absolute gem. Paul lived till he was 97 years old. I passed away in 2016. It was a sad occasion. I was one of the pallbearers at his funeral, and we miss him to this day. But Paul, in addition to being our tanner, brought along to be our part-time rabbi, Michael White from Greensboro. Michael White was very learned in Judaism. He made his living in the refurbished cell phone business. And he was quite a guy. He rode motorcycles and played the guitar. And he was well liked by our congregation. Michael continued on as our rabbi until, I think, business requirements made him unable to continue as our labor rabbi. And in 2002, which was our 75th anniversary, we obtained the services of Beth Sokol, also from Greensboro. Beth also became loved by our congregation, and she stayed with us until 2020, when her and her husband moved to Maryland. One of their sons or daughters lives in the area. They wanted to be closer to them. So Beth left in 2020. And as luck would have it, we once again were able to hire a new lay rabbi who is our rabbi right now. His name is Nadav Avital. His day job, he is a history professor at the Greensboro High School of Performing Arts. His wife, Buffy, is a professor, I think, at Elon College. They have two boys. One was bar mitzvah about a year ago. And Nadav is a native Israeli, so obviously his command of the Hebrew language is excellent. His command of Jewish tradition is excellent. He is full of good ideas. He is a great guy. Everybody loves him. He was the one that, as part of our social activities, forced everybody to go to a Greensboro Grasshopper baseball game. We've been doing that for the last couple of years. As our membership continued to dwindle, unfortunately, we were forced to close our Sunday school. Our Sunday school, we haven't had a Sunday school in about 20 years, basically because there's no Sunday school age children anymore. And as I think I mentioned before, during the 50s, 60s, and 70s, we had as many as close to 40 kids in our Sunday school. But throughout the 90s and the early 2000s, our membership continued to stagnate. Although the members that we had left supported the synagogue, both spiritually and financially, our membership, in addition to being small, was aging. And the board entertained the possibility, first of all, the board entertained the possibility of a merger with the Danville congregation. Danville has also a Reformed congregation, slightly larger than us. We know many of their members. When we have our annual Hanukkah celebration, we invite Danville to come celebrate with us. They invite us to their services every once in a while. And we had a three-person exploratory committee meet with Danville 2 or 3 times about the possibility of merging the congregation. The merger, the talks quickly fell apart when we realized that although Danville's membership was slightly larger than ours, their financial position was weak, and our financial position was very strong. So we continued along, and in 2006, the board got together and began preparation for what is basically called the last will and testament of our synagogue. We outlined plans for the disposition of our assets and the establishment of a Jewish legacy in the area in case we could no longer function as a synagogue. A written agreement was established with the Greensboro Jewish Federation. The Greensboro Jewish Federation is a large fund, and they have as their members congregations from all over Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, West Virginia. We invested quite a bit of money with the Greensboro Jewish Federation, and in turn they agreed that in case of the dissolution of Ohev Zion Synagogue, they would take over and fund the management of our cemetery in perpetuity. So, as it stands, we have money invested with the Greensboro Jewish Federation, and the interest and appreciation that we get on our funds helps balance our budget. We have a member, me, who serves on the board of the Greensboro Federation, and we stay in close contact with them. In 2019, the board decided to sell the home next door, the rabbi's home next door. We no longer had a full-time rabbi, and after Rabbi Friedman's retirement, we were successful in securing a long-term tenant, but it was felt by the board that the sale of the property was a plus in the event that we would one day have to dissolve the synagogue. Okay, it takes us pretty much to the day. Even with our small numbers, we have remained active. We have a lot of activities. We have a spring social that is chaired by my cousin Barry, that we have, every year we have a dinner, and we have an important speaker who comes to us and will speak to us on a number of topics, which has included anti-Semitism on the campuses of the United States, has included what is going on in the Middle East. It has included how Judaism fits into our national political framework, and we've just had absolutely terrific speakers over the year. We do this once a year, except we skipped a couple of years during COVID. We have, during the conclusion of the Yom Kippur, as I mentioned before, we all fast during Yom Kippur. So at the conclusion of the Yom Kippur services, everybody is starving, absolutely. And we have, and we've been doing this for years, we have a congregational break the fast. Everybody brings something, and we have it either at the home, the home of one of our members, or in the last couple of years we've had it at one Starlight. I also mentioned that we have a congregational outing to Greensboro for a baseball game. During the Passover holidays, the Passover Seder, which is the celebration of the Passover holiday, we have a big event at the synagogue where our members come, and we also invite many of our non-Jewish members to participate. So we continue to be active, and we are sticking together. Attendance at our Sabbath and high holiday services is growing. Continuing repairs and renovations of the synagogue and cemetery are being done. Our parking, for those of you who happen to come to the funeral this morning, you notice our parking lot is recently redone. And our financial position continues to be strong. Somebody once mentioned to me that we're going to run out of Jews a long time before we run out of money. And actually, our numbers are now starting to tick slightly, but starting to tick up. We have several new Jewish families that have moved into the area, Martinsville, Henry County, the Eden community. They're participating with us. They're joining the synagogue. They're coming to our services. They're coming to our social events, and they're great members. So compared to 30 years ago, we're in a pretty good spot right now. We're no longer affiliated with any national organization. We now use the Reform prayer books during our Sabbath and our holiday services, but Nadav conducts our services more along the lines of a conservative synagogue. Our services are probably at least 50% in Hebrew. And over the decades, our members have taken many leadership positions in the community. We've integrated ourselves fairly well in the community. Our members have been presidents of retail merchants, presidents of the local country club, president of the local hospital board of trustees, board members of various businesses and industries, members of city council, even the mayor of Martinsville. Both Barry and I have served as president of that great Jewish organization, Christmas Cheer. I served as board member and president of another wonderful Jewish organization, the YMCA. Dan Green, Barry's dad, helped found Little League Baseball in this area. After his passing in 1970, a new football stadium was erected at Martinsville High School. It's still in use, and it bears his name, Dan Green Stadium. Over the years, many of our members have owned businesses in the downtown area. But even though we were competitors, we were still family. Case in point, many of you might remember Gilmore's Boot Shop. It was on Walnut Street, one of those sides, Walnut Street maybe. And Gilmore Rudman and his wife Minnie operated that shop until their retirement. And it was only two people in the store, Gilmore and Minnie. So sometimes lunch was a problem. Not to worry. Gilmore's brother Joe worked with us at Globman's, and when Gilmore was going to lunch, he'd call Joe. Joe would come over and mind the store. And if Joe was busy doing something at Globman's, he'd get in touch with either my dad, Uncle Danny, Barry, or I, and we'd go over and mind the store while Gilmore was at lunch. So, the Jewish community stuck together. In conclusion, the history of the Jews in Martinsville is a testimony to the great efforts of a small group of people who established and maintained a synagogue in which to practice their religion. This small group of people had built, financed, and maintained a synagogue, a rabbi's home, remodeled the building, bought and cared for a cemetery, and employed a full-time rabbi for much of its existence. The history of the Jews in Martinsville is also a testimony to the goodwill that existed between the Jewish and the non-Jewish communities. And as I mentioned earlier, we have a last will and testament on file, and let's hope it stays there. Any questions? I'll be glad to entertain any questions. Yes, sir.
Hi. I was just curious, when are the services on Sundays?
We don't have services on Sunday. Our Sabbath.
How do you do that?
Our Sabbath is, the Jewish Sabbath is sundown Friday to sundown Saturday.
Okay.
Larger Jewish congregations have services Friday night, Saturday morning, probably Saturday afternoon. We have services on Friday nights, and because we don't have a full-time rabbi, we have services usually on the first and third Fridays of the month, and then of course on the major holidays.
And what time?
Sunday is NASCAR and football.
So what time?
7:30.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Where did you go bowling?
Where do we go bowling? In those days, there were two duck pin bowling alleys. One was on, I think it's Jones Street, right down from Hunt, Williams, and Osses. And the other was in the Collinsville area. And I think there's a light fixture place now. I don't think, when we went bowling, I'm not sure that 10 pin had come to our area. Yes, ma'am.
Can you talk a little bit about the families that built on Danley Terrace?
Danley Terrace, there were, in 1954, 3 families built the compound. It was the Globman Green family. The first house, which actually faces Susan Lane, was my parents' house. In the middle were my grandparents' house, Abe and Masha, and they were put in the middle so that my grandmother Masha had her hawk eye on all of us, doing all the time. And then the final house was Barry and Barry's family, and our house and Barry's house is the exact same house, only backwards. Or yeah, like in our house, when you walk in the door, the living room was on the left and Barry's is on the right. They've both been extensively changed with new owners, but that was the original compound. And then at a later time, Ralph Lester built a house right across the street, and Reverend Manson, I can't think of his first name, built on the corner. And I think that's all that's on Danley Terrace.
Mary, what holiday do you observe a New Year? What is that?
Rosh Hashanah.
No, I'm not talking about sins, asking God to forgive your sins.
I'm not sure. I would say.
Yeah, what is it called?
Yom Kippur, Day of Atonement.
Yom Kippur.
Yom Kippur is the Day of Atonement, where
That's the Day of Atonement.
we ask God to forgive all of our sins, and then at the end of the service, we ask God to seal us in the book of life, and then we eat.
Dicky,
Yes.
I remember when we were in high school.
Wait, I got my turn.
When we were in high school, we had an interdenominational youth group. And, I mean, it was with Protestant and Catholic and the Jewish Synagogue.
I don't even remember.
You don't remember that? Well,
No.
I remember your rabbi that you liked so much.
Thurman.
And I can remember he said something that love should bring us together, not separate us.
He was very, very well spoken and very well liked in the community at large. The only thing I remember about that Bible study is when we were in elementary school, and we had about 7 Jewish students in my class, and they would have Bible study. And when they had Bible study, they would take the 7 of us and throw us in the library. Anything else? Yes, ma'am.
If I remember correctly, when Rabbi Friedman was here, he was, of course, friends with other ministers, pastors in the area. And he came to First Baptist Martinsville, Nancy Stanton McDaniel was the Minister of Education then. And on I think it was on a Wednesday night, he led us in the Seder, Passover. And it was so meaningful, and certainly I think helped all the Christians in the room understand and really internalize more of the meaning of the Passover.
Yeah, we always have several non-Jews attend our. I've had Bonnie there a couple times, and the Passover service is fun. There's a lot of food, a lot of wine, and
Well, here in the Baptist Church, so is grape juice.
yes, sir.
I was organist for the only synagogue on the west side of Cleveland back in the, 30 years ago. There was about 50 synagogues on the west side, Stephen Heights. I was the only synagogue on the west side. That was food, religion, and culture shop, because on the organist bench there were 6 books. Hebrew, some kind of English, something else, and all I could say is that's where stress entered my life.
Any other questions?
wanted to mention, Dicky talked about the synagogue and he talked about the early years. Charles Schreifetter came here, I don't know, I'm thinking in the 20s or something like that, but he started Jarvis Pants Company. Saul Schreifetter was the one that the Jews turned to if they needed to know something about the tradition. If they needed to know how to handle something in the prayer book, Saul Schreifetter was the one. So when they bought the cemetery in Ridgeway, the tradition is that Jews should be buried facing Jerusalem so they can get up in the morning and pray. So in this case, we have to be buried facing east. So Grandpa turned around to Saul Schreifetter and said, "Which way is east?" And Saul Schreifetter told Grandpa. And just about everybody in our cemetery is buried facing the wrong way.